In this week's episode, I'm joined by Dr. Marla Corson, founder of Corson Consulting. This week, our conversation is about what to do when people on your team feel psychologically unsafe and don't trust leadership after the election results. We'll also talk about some historic firsts: double the power with Rochester and Alsobrooks, McBride shattering ceilings, Kim's Senate milestone, and more. Hey there, my name is Bernadette Smith, and I'm a keynote speaker and writer. My pronouns are she and her. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I found is there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data. But there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these actions and policies to help you build a more inclusive world. Let's get started. Welcome to the show, Marla. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Can you tell folks a little bit about yourself?
Certainly. I won't do the typical, this is my resume kind of thing, but I am you could call me semi-retired from the corporate world per se, by starting my own company and going out on my own with both safety consulting and also consulting and speaking. And that's been an exciting change for me, a transformation. And those are the types of things that I actually want to help people to do, of how to innovate, how to transform, and how to change. And I really don't look at DEI in the most traditional sense. I look at it as literally leaders taking actions, concrete steps, and doing things very intentionally within their organizations, of being cognizant of surroundings and of people, their sentiment and their needs, and driving change towards that, and trying to integrate that into every practice. So very similar to safety in an organization, it's integrating, so it's in the path of the work, so that it's not something that's separate, but that's integrated into the path of the work. So very much like safety needs to be in an organization.
I love that. And your background is in safety. I think it's great that you're thinking about it in a more integrated approach. And it certainly aligns very well with the theme of this week's show. In this week's 5 Things newsletter, I wrote a little bit about the election results. And I think that there's a lot of folks who are probably scared. Here in the US, I know that there are some folks who are definitely concerned. Am I going to be okay? Is my teammate or manager someone who voted against equality? And there's no doubt that there are going to be people on any team who feel psychologically unsafe and don't trust leadership. Maybe trust has been broken if they've felt psychologically safe before. And so I think that that's a really big problem that has to be solved, right? And so how do we handle that? Have you had any experience with this in the past?
I have. I was working in the corporate world in the last 2 election cycles. Well, actually, everything up until this one, put it that way. And so I've seen this firsthand. And I think the way that I found to address this, and the way that was effective with me and the teams that I was leading, was to be open and candid, right? And to be open to listening, and also to not making judgments. Right? So can we really say that you voted for or against equality? I don't know. So it depends on what your real personal reasons were for voting. So I think first and foremost is to not make an assumption either way of why people have voted the way that they have, and know that it is our right. And that's actually one of the most beautiful things about being here in the United States of America, is that we all have that right. And so I think it's important that we start with that premise and be open to hearing, and we may not fully understand, but open to having a dialogue with people about what their thoughts are, what their reasons are, and then also sharing ours. and being okay with disagreeing, right? You don't have to have a conversation to, align someone to you. You can just have a conversation to learn, understand, and share. And that's what I've tried to drive with teams.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, do you think it's the role of a leader or a manager to create space for those conversations?
100%. 100%. I think it absolutely, needs to be at the most senior leadership position. And to me, it's beyond, sending emails and things like that, or sending, notes to the organization or what your views are. I think it's sometimes there's a need to actually have focus groups to first understand what is the environment. We have assumptions on what it is, but maybe go deeper in and find out what is it, right? And then set the tone of what your expectations are around treating people, in a respectful and kind of equal way. And then I always in my work I expected it of myself. I expected the same of my team, and worked to demonstrate ways that they could do that. So having with our team of say 13 directors and leaders, facilitating conversations. So the more that they learn to have conversations amongst each other as a completely diverse group, the more capable they were to go and pass that down to their teams. Then their teams see that, and then those leaders pass it down, and so it can have a ripple effect. And that's how I have, and I think I've been successful with that. And I'll have to say I've had conversations where I didn't necessarily agree, but I learned something by listening.
Yeah, I think it's important. I love that idea to sort of model it with leaders sort of within their own kind of cohort, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
sort of have them let it trickle down as they influence their team. I think that makes a lot of sense. Last week was maybe some grief and pain, and I think this week people are sort of rolling up their sleeves and getting a little more focused. But I think that we're still going to be dealing with distrust. I think it takes a while to kind of rebuild that. And so I love your idea of being curious and not sort of shutting people out because of the assumptions we might have about how they feel or why they voted or whatever, right? I think that assumptions are always going to get us in trouble.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One thing that I think is going to be really important here is to help remind folks of the values, the organization's values, the organization's goals. And I'm sure if you work for a values driven organization, the type of place where the values are on the wall, where people are really living the values, there's likely to be a value in there that's focused on inclusion or respect or humanity or something to that effect, right? And working as one, something to that effect. And I think it's going to be really important for leaders to emphasize that, right? And to really embody that as well, because at the end of the day, we have to get our work done.
Mm-hmm. And in reality, if we do that, our work can be better. So having more minds, even if they're radically different from ours, that's how innovation actually comes about. Mm-hmm. So, but I really think it is a critical part of leadership that people need to really take, really reflect deeply on where they stand and how they will think in advance of how you'll handle situations and how you will, seek to understand others and how you'll create environments of trust and how you'll be vulnerable, right? Vulnerability is key for people to see. And I think also allow for emotions that are not typical. Instead of shutting down a meeting when someone gets really upset or is crying or some strong emotion that generally people get really nervous about. I think it's important for a leader to help work through that. So you don't just set it aside or have everybody stop. Is acknowledge that, work through that, and that's where a lot of learning takes place, and that's where trust is built as well.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned vulnerability. I think that's really key here. And I also think that it's going to be hard for folks from traditionally marginalized groups to feel safe being vulnerable, right? Especially if they have this sort of distrust with folks. So how do you recommend sort of cultivating, restoring, hopefully, people's sort of sense of safety when it comes to vulnerability?
Yeah, I think, in thinking of that question, the first thought that came to my mind actually was, gosh, I've kind of lived with that mistrust my whole life. So I've just kind of, you learn to deal with it. So I have. And there's probably a lot that could say that. I've generally worked in environments where I was very much the most unique person in the group for multiple different reasons, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking first of how have I learned to do that? And it starts with learning to value yourself.
Right.
Because if you have a value of yourself, irrespective of what others think, irrespective of what others do, that's your first step into that. It's how do
Yeah.
you value yourself, not in comparison with others or based on what others think or say or do or whatever. But first, it starts in here.
Yeah.
And then you can, take your steps to go outside of that and to and part of it is acknowledging, what your own biases are, what your own fears are, and really actively working through those. And sometimes people don't take the time to do that. Or they see that as, not important, or maybe don't just see it as a part of, personal growth. But I think it's very important.
And we all have our own biases and we all have our own
You
fears, right? Even those of us from traditionally marginalized groups. So we're
right,
not immune from that.
right.
Yeah, I think that's really key. I think it's just kind of another tip I wanted to add to this is that gather some resources because especially resources that the organization can offer as part of their benefits, whether it's access to an EAP or
Right.
the Calm app or whatever. Like, make sure that you have those sort of resources top of mind and can share those as folks are processing all of this. But at the end of the day, you have to sort of do both. You have to create the space for the conversation, you have to provide the resources, and then get back to work.
Yeah.
And so finding that balance is going to be really key. And I think, living values and modeling that kind of leadership and that kind of curiosity is going to be a great way to do it.
100% agree. In line with kind of embedding this into how we work, if you think
Yeah.
about it, to me, in really good organizations where there are real one-on-ones,
Mm-hmm.
between leaders and different levels. For myself, I would have my team, they'd prepare kind of a quick report. And I even did this with my, who I reported to as well. But you write down kind of, what's going well, what's not, what do you
Mm-hmm.
need help with, and what your future plans are, those types of things. So it kind of guides the conversation, and that is the one of the places to be very aware of what really is happening, because sometimes people won't show it or won't say it, but it may be very subtle in something like that, and use a one-on-one that is literally that. It should be a one-on-one. And if
Uh-huh.
we do that and we do that consistently, that has already created a platform for us to be able to, in those critical moments, like this past week, that
Mm-hmm.
you can, if you have that next one-on-one this Monday or next Tuesday, that
Mm-hmm.
can be part of the dialogue. And maybe you even bring it up, so you're opening the space for people to talk about something in the path of your normal work. Right. So then
Right.
it's not just this, outside thing. It's, yeah, we're having a one-on-one, and, there's been a lot of discussion about this. Is there anything you want to talk about, or how are things going for you? Right.
Yeah.
So using those things as opportunities to inquire, and at least show that you are cognizant that there are, emotions going on, and they'll vary from person to person. But I think that's a very practical way to do that. That's just can be a part of your normal work process, workflow.
I love that because it's something that every manager can easily do if they have
Mhm.
one-on-ones. It also, adding structure like that, it can reduce recency bias, right? It can
Right.
reduce all kinds of biases, right? And then it's sort of and if it's that consistent cadence, then you're right. It doesn't feel like this extra thing. Oh, how are you feeling today? How are you,
Yeah.
doesn't feel like this sort of pandering thing, or it reduces the likelihood of it being perceived that way.
Right.
All right. Well, let's get into this week's good vibes. This week's good vibes are all election firsts. So the first story this week is from Congress. Double the power with Rochester and Alsobrooks. So for the first time, two Black women, Lisa Blunt Rochester of Delaware and Angela Alsobrooks of Maryland, will serve simultaneously in the U.S. Senate. So Blunt Rochester is already Delaware's at-large representative and is making history as the first Black senator. And also Brooks is an executive in a county in Maryland and the first Black woman senator. So we're now up to 5 Black senators, a historic high. We'll take it.
Yep, we have to. And you know what's great about that? And I think I'm so glad that you pulled out some of these positive stories, because I think they make it, kind of just set aside in amongst all of the other, conversations and issues going on. But these are real things. These are steps. And you think about, Kamala Harris's speech, her last one, when she conceded the election, and she talked about there still being hope, and that it's like kind of chipping away, right? And that and you have to start somewhere. There has to be firsts. So fantastic that there's 5. Do I wish that there was 25? Sure, but there's 5. That's better than any other time. And the really great thing about that is that young women that look like me, will say, I can do that. If she can do that, I can do that. Wow, she did that. That's amazing. And that helps us to move forward, and that gives individuals hope.
Absolutely. Well, here's another one. Here's another first. Sarah McBride. Her election to Congress marks a breakthrough as the first openly trans person in this role. So she is currently a representative in the state of Delaware, a state rep. And amazing. She is brilliant, by the way. I loved her book. I forget what it's called right now. But it was a book before she was ever elected. And she has a really amazing story.
She does. And again, what another example of what is actually possible.
Yeah.
So how many people like her are seeing this and saying, oh my gosh, I never thought that could be possible for me.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
But it is. I can see it. And then you can reach for that and strive for that. And honestly, seeing, being here in Pennsylvania and seeing some of the commercials for Delaware and with her, it was neat to see that, and to see the support there for her. And that's a change for our society. It is.
Absolutely.
And it's a positive one.
Yeah.
And it may seem positive to some, it's positive to me, and it may not be to others. And so that's the other thing, to be open to dialogue, that there may be people that don't see it the same way. They're saying, but, how can we still have that dialogue about, what I see about it, and, and also listening to what others might see or not see.
That's right. Well, the people who aren't a fan probably aren't watching this show or listening to this show. Her book, by the way, it's coming back to me, is called Tomorrow Will Be Different. It's a fantastic memoir. Okay, the third story this week is about Emily Randall, who became the first openly LGBTQ person to represent Washington State in Congress, the first LGBTQ plus Latina to serve in the U.S. House, and her district's first Congresswoman. So in the state of Washington, she sponsored or co-sponsored about 200 bills with significant achievements in expanding abortion access and creating programs for college students, financial aid. Good news.
Yeah, I thought that was fantastic. And, being multiple firsts, but then also showing what she's already done.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, so that was even more powerful when I read the 200 bills and all the other things that she's been supporting and doing. And again, it's just the same. It's someone needed to start there, and she did. And people elected her into that position.
That's right. I love it. The fourth story this week is about Andy Kim from New Jersey, who was elected as the first Korean American senator. Previously a representative known for his hands-on approach, like cleaning the Capitol after the January 6th insurrection. More and more Asian Americans in politics. It's really important. Again, visibility, representation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, I'll share a quick. I have a colleague that's worked with me for many years, and and his wife, about 2 years ago, their citizenship became final. So they're U.S. citizens, but they're originally from China. And one of their sons he's probably 15 or so, is looking into getting into politics, which isn't that fantastic that someone that young would be thinking about it. But look at what that is for him to see.
Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly.
to, and the story that, Kim has, and that, my colleague's son will have as well. So I was really excited to see that.
Absolutely. These were not happening when I was a kid, right? It was never even conceivable. So,
Right.
yeah. All right. And the last story this week is about Julie Johnson, who made history as the first openly gay representative from the U.S. South, taking the 32nd district in Texas. So she's new congresswoman, and her legislative record in Texas includes defeating 200 plus anti-LGBTQ plus bills and creating the first LGBTQ plus caucus in Texas. So cheers to Julie.
Pretty incredible. And just another story of, look at the things that she has done. And I think what's so great about that is that it shows that these people, kind of going back to the DEI piece, these aren't DEI hires. These are people that have worked tirelessly to drive change, and they have this commitment and this drive to do good in the world and to represent others like them.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And I also think, are they looking at this and all depressed and all those things? I'll bet they're not. And so they don't need us to be either, right?
They got work to do.
Yeah, like just say, okay, this part of the election didn't turn out the way that, I voted, but that's okay. And there's still great things that we can do and contribute to this world, to this country, and to just our neighbors, our families, all of it.
I completely agree. All right, Marla. Well, let's move into this week's Good Vibes to Go. I'll share my Good Vibe to Go, which is a video of a woman in Michigan asking her neighbor how to wear a headscarf at a mosque. I think it's just a beautiful video. I'll put it in the show notes and in the chat. And it just kind of reminds me of, I fundamentally believe we are good and we are kind. So that is my Good Vibe to Go. And do you have a Good Vibe to Go to share with folks?
I do. I had and this is just something that happened just on Saturday. I have a group of Democrats that I've joined in the area earlier this year. And we had a gathering on Saturday. And, and I share this as a good vibe of something that you can do that was actually just super beneficial. It was great to bring a group of people together that have, that we voted the same, right? Mm-hmm. But for varying different reasons. And I thought that was what was most important. And speaking with a doctor there and why her views were different, I thought, wow, that's an interesting point. But what it showed me was, how open we were to have that discussion. Think about how much I learned from that. How much could we learn from listening to other people that didn't actually vote the same to really understand, and how much we could gain from that. So I guess the good point of that is I walked away from that feeling fulfilled and feeling like I had learned more and had more to reflect on. So I would say take that opportunity with anyone, not just with people who have the same viewpoint, but be open to those who don't, and really take note of what you've learned from them.
I love it.
And create good vibes from that.
Thank you. And you know what? I think that we will be less lonely as a society, as a culture, when we find more of what unites us and more common ground, right? So that's a beautiful thing. Marla, you have been an absolutely joyful and wonderful guest this day. And I was wondering how folks can keep in touch with you.
Well, you can go to marlacorson.com, and there's all of my information there and ways to connect with me, set up a meeting, set up a call. So happy to do that. And thank you again, Bernadette.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, Marla. Folks, have a great week. And if you don't already get the 5 Things newsletter, you can subscribe at 5thingsdei.com. Have a good one. Thank you for listening to 5 Things in 15 Minutes. I hope you found yourself inspired by at least one of this week's stories. If you did, would you mind sharing it with a colleague and leaving us a review on your favorite podcasting platform? And if you don't already get my 5 Things newsletter, join at 5thingsdei.com. I'm Bernadette Smith, and I'll see you next week right here for 5 Things in 15 Minutes, bringing good vibes to DEI.